just like culture in general and most other aspects of culture, language is always changing. It's dynamic. And just like other aspects of culture, we tend to not realize that. We tend to think of language as being stable, and that the way English is spoken is how English should be spoken and how it has always been spoken. But if we think critically, we can see changes in our language use, how it's structured, how we speak, and the things we speak about. So a really easy example for this is just thinking about slang. So new slang comes and goes in such a quick period of time that it's clear that language is changing and is dynamic. And then we have some slang that stays for quite long periods of time, and then will shift in and out. Okay, and then words can change their meaning over time. Saying things are sick could mean that they're good, when that historically might have meant it's bad, right? So we can see that language is changing. It's just that in our common experience of language, it seems like it's very stable. But once we start thinking critically about it, we can realize very quickly that it does change often. Okay, and so language can change for a variety of ways. It can change because of diffusion from outside cultures. So the use of cuisine is a French word for the kitchen, but we use that, it comes from a different culture. And we use it because there was some prestige associated with French culinary tradition at that time period, and so we adopted that language. We can also see additions to our language because of innovation or invention or technological advancements. So the addition of the word cell phone, for example, we wouldn't have needed that had there not been that technology. So we can see different pieces of our culture influencing our language, right? Then we can also see colonialism kind of developed and was the inspiration for the development of blended languages. So blended languages just take two or more parent languages and make kind of a new language out of them. Creole is a classic example. So we have French Creole in like New Orleans, for example. In Belize, they speak a Spanish Creole. And there it's a combination of Spanish and what are called slave languages. So languages from traditionally African slaves who were brought to Central America. And so these languages blended together to create a new language that functions entirely on its own, but has pieces mixed and blended together from the two parent languages. Then there's Pidgin, which is another example of a mixed language. It typically has the vocabulary from one language and the grammar from another and blends them into one. Okay, usually a simplified grammar, but again, another example of just blending of two languages to create a new. All right, and just really good examples of how dynamic language can be and how quickly it can change and kind of become its own new language. And so some cultures really don't like this idea. They don't like the idea of language changing, and they put a lot of emphasis on traditional language. Okay, so in the 20th century, Dutch monarchs changed the official spelling of words to match contemporary pronunciations. Okay, and so they're formally recognizing the sociolinguistic trends of their culture. Okay, so they're changing the actual structure of the cultural language to reflect how the language is spoken or used by the people, which is really very interesting. On the other hand, France has a very particular relationship with their language. They really try to preserve not only traditional French culture, but traditional French language as a piece of that. Okay, so they outlaw words borrowed from English, and they aren't officially recognized words. Okay, so there's a whole committee that meets to decide if words will be accepted into the French lexicon, and it's very strict about what can be let in. And so they have outlawed American words, or English words, I should say, but native French speakers continue to use those words. And so this is another example of trying to alter the sociolinguistic patterns of a culture by altering the descriptive linguistic patterns of a culture, but it doesn't always work that way. So actual law and rules of a culture, of a government, don't tend to influence the actual everyday use of the language like we would think they do. It doesn't always have such a strong correlation. Okay, and then French Canadians in Quebec speak Quebecois, which is their local dialect of French, and they really, really, really don't like Anglicization or English influence in their culture at all. So this goes beyond language and includes the culture in general. So in Quebec, business has to be conducted in French. Public signs must be written in French. They can have English, but French has to be larger and has to be first. Okay, on all of the signs, road signs, even things like KFC has to be changed to, I think it's PFC or something like that. It's poulet frit instead of fried chicken. And so they can't have it named KFC. They have to switch the letters. So everything has to be in French. And it goes as far as when I was in Quebec, there was an issue in Montreal because there's an like an Anglo-Saxon community who speaks English, and they're refusing to build subway stations in that community because they speak English. And so there was some kind of, and this is the story on the street, right, that they're not building that subway station because those people speak English instead of French. They're not Quebecois. And so this kind of issue with Anglicization of Quebec goes beyond language, and it interrupts the culture and the functioning of the city and the region in general. And another example of this, so if we're talking about blending of languages and the changing of languages, this can lead to language death. So when a language is no longer has any native speakers. Okay, and so as you can read there on your own, about half of the world's languages are facing extinction within the next century. And this is because larger, more popular languages are being spoken more frequently than these smaller languages or languages that only have a few native speakers. Okay, so language is a way that people experience richness of their culture, and because language is so representative of culture and so strongly influenced by culture, as well as influencing culture itself, losing language can represent a loss of culture's fullness or a culture in itself. So this is why language loss is important. It's not just that people don't want to adapt and don't want to speak a new language. It's that you actually lose some richness and some detail of a culture when you lose that language.